All right. So I'm here with like one of my favorite psychotherapists. How fun is that? Annie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm thrilled to know that you do have a favorite psychotherapist, so I'm happy to be one of them.
I've never had psychotherapy, but maybe I need some. Who knows? And I don't know how to turn that Zoom thing off. Every time I move my hands, I get the thumbs up on Zoom, which is kind of fun.
Well, it's kind of funny and it's very encouraging for me, so thank you.
There you go. Thumbs up all the way.
Thumbs up.
Well, thank you for saying yes to having a conversation with me today. I think that in today's day and age, mental health is such an important conversation. And I think that especially for business owners, often not a lot, there's not a lot of people talking about business owners and their mental health. And so, I'd
Mm.
really love to just kind of dive into a few things with you. And maybe my starting question for you is really because you're a business owner, you are a psychotherapist and you have all kinds of expertise in different areas of mental health practice, and you own a practice with other clinicians, but you're a business owner as well. And so when you think about owning a business, what are some of the things that you think business owners should really be mindful of when it comes to, I don't want to use the word managing. I think when I want to use the word, I want to use like understanding when maybe there's a little something, something going on that they don't recognize as potentially being a mental health challenge. So, what are some of the flags that
Mhm.
business owners should be looking for that might indicate that maybe they need some extra support?
Oh, sure. Gosh, I mean, I could talk about this all day long. So, um, just to set the sort of stage for what I'm going to share, yes, in addition to being a licensed psychotherapist and a trauma clinician, very specifically, I am also the founder and owner of a fairly large small business, Evergreen Counseling, which is a therapy center located in Berkeley, California, but serving clients all over California and Florida, actually. And I have 24 W-2 employees. We have corporate compliance laws. We have to be, compliant with financial compliance, economic nexus, licensing laws. So it is a complex, small, big business.
Of
And so
course.
what I'm going to say stems from both my content expertise as a mental health clinician, as well as somebody who has grown this business in the last 5 years. I think that there is nothing on the planet apart from trying to run your own business or being in a long-term romantic relationship that will reflect your personal growth material to you so vividly. If you want to know what all of your material is, either be in a long-term romantic relationship or start your own business, because it will show up all the time, the areas that you need to work on. And so to answer your question, well, okay, how do people know what is the material coming up that they need to work on?
Mhm.
My goodness, where do we even begin? I think it starts from, the fact that when we grow businesses, we start to take up space. We either raise our fees or we get out there in the market, and stories start to come up for us. Like, I'm not good enough. I don't deserve to earn this much. Is there some sort of danger I might feel if I get a little bit more visible, if I start getting more press? And then goodness knows a lot of your material can show up too when you start to hire people for the first time. Oh goodness, I can't press back on her because I'm afraid she'll leave. Maybe you have a childhood history of, if you show your anger or your displeasure, the relationship was cut off. This material is going to be reflected back as you start to hire and manage your staff. As you start to build a bigger business and you have to juggle compliance and financial issues, you may get a sense of what your own stories are about financial scarcity or danger in general. So there's endless grist for the mill, I think, when it comes to business ownership in terms of getting to know what our maladaptive stories are, our maladaptive patterns and behaviors are. I mean, I could go on and on about this, but does this make sense? Does this kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, when I hear you say those things, I think of that as more maybe leadership and communication skills opportunities. I think what I really am wondering is how do business owners know if they need therapy. What are some of the
Uh,
flags that, because you can have a bad day. You and I we were actually talking about our businesses before we started to record. And you can have a bad day, a bad month, a bad week, a bad year. And there are times when it can weigh on you a lot more heavily than
mhm.
other times. So,
Right.
the more resilient you are, obviously the more you can cope with the peaks and valleys in your business. But what are some signs that an actual individual who owns a business might need some help?
So, back to all of what I just mentioned and how you said, well, that sounds kind of like leadership or mindset work. Yeah, it could be. And we have to look at this as existing on a spectrum.
Okay.
If for whatever reason your emotional response to taking up space is maybe more at the mild end of the spectrum, perhaps that is mindset work. And maybe that's work that you work on with a business coach or in a peer group of other, business owners.
Hmm.
But when the spectrum of severity leans more towards, again, the more severe side of the spectrum, right? If you are starting to lose sleep, if you are starting to have ruminating thoughts, if you're starting to feel high degrees of anxiety, depression, or a reaction to the content that is disproportionate to what the content is, it's a signal that the past might be present. And this
Hmm.
isn't just a normative, typical upper limit issue that can be worked on with mindset work and a few more business skills or mentoring, etc. This may signal there is something developmentally in your past that needs to be addressed and worked through in order to help you have a more appropriate response in the present. So, to summarize what I'm saying, the severity of the response is usually a signal of whether or not it's historical material or if it's normative, appropriate discomfort to growing a business.
Gotcha. So, like, if you're losing your temper over something that's really a 1 out of 10 on a problem, then there's probably something going on in your
Very
past that's
possibly.
causing you to be overreactionary to something.
Very possibly. Look, we can
Mhm.
we can get these reflections back to us in a lot of different ways. Like one, we can feel severely dysregulated, and we can notice that as a signal. Or if our
What
teammates,
can you explain what
sure.
that means? Because I hear people use
Oh
that term all
yeah.
the time,
Sure.
dysregulated. Well, what the heck does that mean? How is a human being what is that?
Totally. So this all stems from the concept of emotional regulation. And emotional regulation is essentially our ability to keep ourselves in what the neuropsychiatrist Dan Siegel would call the window of tolerance, the optimal emotional arousal zone, where we can feel our feelings, but still have our prefrontal cortexes online and be able to be rational and make sound, good choices. If we eclipse that window of tolerance, we go either into the hyper arousal emotional zone or the hypo arousal zone, meaning our prefrontal cortexes go offline and the limbic system kicks in, right? Our reptilian brain kicks in,
Mhm.
and we are prone to either high degrees of anxiety, rash, reckless action, anger, irritability. That's in the hyper arousal zone. And then in the hypo arousal zone, we start to shut down. We get depressed, we get lethargic, we tune out, we disassociate.
Mm.
So, emotional regulation stems from this entire concept of are we able to stay in that window of tolerance where, yeah, we're feeling our feelings, but we're still able to keep our brains online and make functional sound choices? Emotional dysregulation, right, by extension, is when we're outside of that optimal arousal zone and we're going to that place where we're not able to utilize executive functioning skills or sound decision making skills. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you for
Yeah.
explaining that because it's a term that I hear all the time, and I don't know. I have my own ideas around what it is, but now that you've explained it, I understand it differently. So that's great.
Yeah. And so I just, building off of that, whenever we find ourselves very much emotionally dysregulated, that can be a clue in our businesses that there's material for us to work on. I will say too, and this is very um, common for those of us who manage teams, when our teams start reflecting back to us, hey, I'm about to leave if you don't get either your responses under control or your anxiety or the way you're talking to me under control. Well, now that is also a wonderful signal that this is maybe not just a leadership issue, but this
Mhm.
is maybe more of your own personal work issues at play as well.
Mhm. And I'm sure that goes both ways because I'm sure there are also situations where business owners have team members
Oh,
who are not emotionally regulated either, and they're
Uh-huh.
acting out inappropriately
Mhm.
to things that come up in the workplace as well.
Oh, 100%. But of course, then it gets into that very tricky territory as business owners and HR issues and labor laws, et cetera. We can't necessarily say, hey, get your butt into therapy if you want to keep your
Right.
job, right? But certainly our employees can act out their own material, in the workplace. I think most of us do. And for me, at least at my therapy center and my fairly large workplace, we strive to create a really emotionally safe environment where it's okay to have rupture and repair among the staff members, where it's okay to talk about mental health issues, what we need, what we're working on. And I do understand in most workplaces with HR and labor laws, it becomes a very delicate issue for us as business owners
Mhm.
when we see our staff members maybe acting out their own material. And how we manage that is both it's very strategic what we need to do next.
Mhm. I think it's a challenging space for a lot of business owners because a lot of individuals use labels that are not necessarily diagnosed labels. And so
Mm,
what I mean by that is somebody who's uh, feeling anxious will say they have anxiety. Somebody who's feeling down will say they have depression. And sometimes I think people use they 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 self diagnose, and it's not always the right diagnosis. And then the business owner is like, okay, is does this person really have an anxiety problem, or are they just saying they have anxiety?
mm,
It's again, it's that gray area. Like,
mhm,
it's not exactly something easy to have a conversation with somebody about. I had a team member who worked on my team once do a very beautiful job of explaining to me the difference between someone who has, debilitating anxiety
mm,
and it takes medication because their anxiety is so bad versus somebody who is just saying they have, basically one-off anxiety. And that was really helpful for me having that individual explain,
mm.
what that looks like.
Mm, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking both as a clinician and a business owner now. Of course, there's very discrete criterion where we would diagnose anyone with, an anxiety disorder or a depressive disorder. Um,
Hmm.
as far as the workplace, though, and that's very important clinically for me in terms of the way I work and insurance and all of that. But as far as how it extends to the workplace, I'm less concerned if somebody wants to self-diagnose, I have anxiety or I have depression. The it doesn't matter if they actually meet those clinical check marks. The way I'm going to approach that as a business owner is roughly the same if they meet those, criterion or not. I'm going to be as accommodating as I can be, right? I'm going to
Hmm.
be curious with them within the scope of what I'm allowed to talk about HR wise. And I'm still going to be mindful of needing them to achieve the criterion of their job and
Hmm.
having to take a look at what I have to do or the hard decisions I may need to make in terms of PIPs or medical leaves of absences if they can't live up to their job responsibilities.
Hmm.
Mental health in the workplace becomes a very complex issue. I mean, quite frankly, HR managers get copious amounts of training on this within their departments and corporations. Us as small business owners, we don't necessarily have that training.
Hmm.
So the question is, okay, if an employee brings up a mental health issue, how do I handle that? What do I do? It can
Hmm.
be a very unknown topic area for a lot of small business
Yeah.
owners.
I know that one of the things that I've noticed in my own business is over the last few years, we have focused a lot on improving our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost feels like the more I double down on improving culture in the workplace, the less I hear people talk about mental health challenges.
Oh,
And so
interesting.
it's interesting how culture can maybe a poor culture or a toxic culture, a negative culture can, and I don't think that I mean, I don't know because I'm not the person in the culture on the receiving end of it. I don't think our culture was toxic, but I did think there were opportunities for us to improve our culture, which is why I've been working so hard to do that. I think that COVID made culture formation challenging for a lot of people because it's hard to build a relationship when you're always viewing somebody through a screen.
Mhm.
And Our team is remote, and prior to COVID, we used to bring everybody together, once a year. We'd have some type of a meeting. And then when COVID hit, because we have a US company and we have a Canadian company, it wasn't easy for us to do that. And so we had to find other ways to try to strengthen the culture. And then, this year we were actually able to bring everyone together in January, which was really, really great for our culture. But I think that sometimes the the culture you create for your team also impacts their mental health in a huge way.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Now, whether or not individuals have mental health issues stemming from their own personal lives, I mean, of course they will. But the more supportive and the better a culture we can make in our workplaces, certainly can and support people with whatever mental health issues they live with, period, full stop. It's certainly something I think all of us should be trying to do anyway.
Mhm.
It's not just for supporting people's mental health, but frankly for employee retention and
Yeah, absolutely.
positive Glassdoor reviews, all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, question for you.
Sure.
Um, what is relational trauma and
Mm.
how does it affect people?
So relational trauma, as I define it, is the kind of complex chronic trauma that takes place in the course of a power imbalanced relationship, usually between a child and a caretaker over a long stretch of time. In other words, a really sort of easy way to define it is childhood trauma, right?
Mhm.
In that case, if it's a child and caretaker. But I do want to be mindful that relational trauma can also take place in a romantic relationship as an
Mhm.
adult or as an adolescent, where there is a very high degree of disparity around power differentials. So it's the kind of relationship that takes place in relationship. Well, rather, I should say it's the kind of trauma that takes place in relationship. And it's not, let's say, like a single incident trauma, like a scary plane flight or a car
Mhm.
crash or anything like that. When this kind of trauma takes place in relationship, it usually leaves the individual with a whole host of biopsychosocial impacts that are very complex to treat depending on the severity of the trauma, more so than if it was a single incident trauma.
Okay, so this would be a child who grew up with one or both parents that were challenging for them, not just in one instance, but over many, many, many years. Or again,
Correct.
a romantic relationship where it's not one incident, it's something that's gone on for a period of time. Okay.
Very
And
typically, yeah, I'll just elaborate. Very typically, this happens in the context of a child being raised by mood or personality disordered parents.
mhm,
And also very typically, this can take place uh, with a whole host of other complex variables,
mhm,
insecurity in housing, food, community, etc. But the thing I do want to just sort of highlight is that trauma is a subjective experience. Anything that overwhelms an individual's brain and body to cope with a situation can lodge as a trauma. It's not just a discrete set of experiences, it's how the individual subjectively tolerates what happens or doesn't
right.
tolerate.
So
Yeah,
two people could experience the exact same thing in a family, and one could have trauma and the other not.
exactly. I've written about that pretty
Okay.
extensively before.
And how does this relational trauma typically affect people later in life? How does it manifest itself in your day-to-day life?
Oh, goodness, how much time do we have? The ways that it can impact somebody are, as varied and complex as the amount of people there are on the planet. But very typically, when we look at somebody who experienced relational trauma early on, again, let's say a child raised by mentally ill parents or where one or both were mentally ill, that person is going to grow up with some severe impairments in terms of their psychological foundation. Impairments meaning they may not know what a healthy relationship looks and feel like. They may
Mhm,
struggle to know what a healthy functional boundary is for themselves and others. They may struggle with healthy functional communication versus aggressive or passive aggressive communication. They may struggle with emotional regulation, like we were talking about earlier,
mhm,
knowing what their feelings are and then even appropriately feeling and expressing them. They may struggle with appropriate self-soothing mechanisms and versus turning towards maladaptive self-soothing mechanisms, drinking, binge eating and purging, etc. there's a lot of negative biopsychosocial impacts that can come from a complex trauma background. And I'll also name too, individuals with relational trauma backgrounds can struggle mightily in their relationships as adults, not
Mhm.
knowing exactly how to be in relationship in functional, healthy ways.
Right,
So
'cause they
I could
haven't
go
had
on
that
and on.
model.
Exactly, exactly. How on earth is a child who was raised by an alcoholic narcissist and a suicidally depressed mother, supposed to grow up and find and date and marry a healthy, functional partner when they have literally no idea what this person looks like and they have cripplingly low self-esteem? It's just there's a lot that we have to work through and go back and repair in terms of a psychological foundation to
Mhm,
support that person in living usually a healthy, functional adulthood.
mhm. Can you talk to me a little bit about, resilience?
Oh, I could talk to you about resilience all day long. Absolutely. What would you like to talk about specifically?
Um, what like, maybe just, maybe just talk to us about what it is and how to be more resilient. So, you know, I think sometimes when we're suffering, we can choose to make ourselves suffer more, and or we can learn how to become more resilient. And when I say learn how to become more resilient, because I do believe that there are practices and things that you can do to become more resilient. And so that's what I'm interested in. Like, what is resiliency to you, and what are things people can do to become
Mhm,
more resilient? Because bad things are going to happen in life.
mhm.
Stress is going to happen in life. We are
All the
going to have ups and downs in our life. No one's getting out alive, and no one's getting out without having their feelings hurt or having,
mhm.
things that are bothersome happen in their life. So, what are some ways that people can become more resilient when something feels like it's knocked them down?
You know, I really appreciate this conversation. It's an opportunity for me to organize my thoughts around this a little bit more. Um, Resilience to me has become a little bit one of those words, those pop psychology words used so much that it's all but lost its meaning. So I'm going to step back for a second and just reframe it into how I think about it, particularly in my clinical work. I think resilience is not that sort of um, that idea that a hard thing happens and I can just instantly have the optimistic reframe and bounce back and feel fine and dandy if a hard thing happens. To me, what I'm always clinically curious about and what I'm looking for and what I'm looking to help my clients uh, develop more is a capacity to endure, right? Because again, first and foremost, it starts with mindset. The mindset that you mentioned of hard things are going to happen, right? Well, not everybody has that mindset. Some people have a mindset of if a hard thing happens, the universe is out to get me, versus maybe a more normative mindset of life is actually really, really hard, right? Any existentialist, you read any existential writing, and they will say life is suffering, right?
Mhm,
So, how do we help, first and foremost, somebody have a more expansive mindset that doesn't view themselves as a target of life or the universe, but rather understands that life is more of an endurance sport and hard things are going to happen along the way? So, I'm always looking to cultivate um, that mindset first and foremost.
mhm,
And then in terms of resilience when hard things happen, I think of it this way. How do I help a person effectively cope with the hard thing that's happening, making more healthy functional choices than maladaptive choices? And what I mean by that is, does that person have a skill set to reach out to their five best girlfriends and say, ouch, I'm having a really hard day, versus turning towards the bottle of vodka in the freezer and,
mhm,
having three drinks that night? How do I help them choose more adaptive coping mechanisms when hard things begin to happen? And
mhm,
then finally, right, as they exercise a skill set of effective resourcing through the hard things, what is their mindset after the hard thing ends, or even as they're going through the hard thing, right? Again, are they viewing themselves as a victim? Are they viewing this as a catastrophe? Or are they starting to shift their mindset? What can I learn from this, right? How is this going to make me stronger? In what ways am I safe and okay, even as this hard thing is happening? So, this was a very long winded answer to say that for me, resilience is about having adequate and appropriate mindset and adequate and appropriate tools to flex throughout the hard time. And then again, that mindset at the end, right? What have I learned from this? How have I grown?
Mhm.
To better set ourselves up to endure the next hard thing because it will be
Mhm.
coming.
It's funny, I think I'm a pretty resilient person, and I also think one of the best things that I do for my mental health, which seems pretty simple, is I I walk or I go to the gym
Yeah,
almost every day,
yeah.
and I make sure that I have time for me in the morning to have a cup of coffee and spend 15 minutes just reading.
Yes.
And when I do those things, those simple things every day, it feels like the hard things aren't as hard. And I'm the first to admit I'd like a glass of wine at the every evening. But it's not it's not usually because I'm trying to cope with something, but when I do have a really hard day, when
Mhm.
I'm having one of those days where I feel really frustrated, uh, one of the best things I can do is put my running shoes on and go for a walk.
Oh, for
And
sure.
just going for a walk allows me to just think things through and clear my mind. And it's almost like it sounds funny, but it's like I'm walking it off, like I'm shaking it off just by
Of
getting out there
course.
and moving.
Of course. When I had to take my continuing education units to renew my license this year, clinicians have to renew them every 2 years. I took a very large course on exercise physiology and psychology around why exercise does have so many psychological benefits for us,
Mhm.
because it's a personal and professional fascination. I likewise include exercise as pretty well, sleep first, exercise second in
Yeah.
terms of managing my own mental health, because I think it's as close to a silver bullet as we have in terms of really um, metabolizing the hard stuff of life on a daily basis. And this class that I took, which, I probably can't cite all the research in this 40-hour class, really reified why exercise. And again, we're not talking about high intensity cardio, right? We're talking
Mhm.
about a gentle walk, exercising an aerobic class. Sure, high intensity cardio is fine. We help our brains and our body digest the material that happened to us. We grow new neural pathways, we grow new neural cells. We basically help our brains and our bodies become more healthy and resilient when we exercise. So I'm unsurprised to hear that, Lisa. I mean, truth be told, I'm a different person when I don't get to exercise in the morning versus when I do. So
Mhm.
I join you in that, actually.
Yeah, yeah. And if I go too many days without doing that, I
Mm.
find myself being more easily triggered,
Sure.
more reactionary to things that normally wouldn't bother me. And it makes a huge, huge difference in my life.
I agree. And so I think a large part of mental health for all of us starts with making sure we have the fundamentals and the foundationals in place. Again, sleep, diet, and I'm not talking about diet as in weight loss. I'm
Yeah.
talking what are we putting into our bodies? Exercise, social time, right? Like what connected, nourishing relationships are we in touch with on a daily
Mhm.
basis? You start to form what Dr. Dan Siegel would call the healthy mind platter, which is essentially these building block fundamentals that contribute to sound, decent, good mental health. So
Mhm.
these are good practices for any of us to have in place, regardless of whether or not we come from a relational trauma background or not. There's still what we would all, as humans, want to have in place to have adequate enough mental health. And of course, we develop a nice, wide, juicy, rich toolbox of other tools to bring in when that's not enough, right? When the
Mhm.
days get really hard, or when we're sitting at the bottom of the shower crying, right?
Mhm.
But starting off with those wonderful sound fundamentals is something we should all be doing.
Mhm. What are your thoughts on this?
On the phone.
Mobile devices, social media, nonstop notifications. What, in your professional opinion, impact is our addiction to our
Mhm.
devices having on our mental health?
Well, I'll answer this in a couple of different ways. One, I've been catching myself fantasizing more and more and more about the analog days, about like the days where I did not have a cell phone, like and thinking, oh my gosh, how do I get back to that? And being really curious with my husband about how we can have sort of kind of like a digital diet household and not have our phones around as much. And the reason I've been thinking about that is a lot is because I do see how negative it is for my own mental health
Mhm.
to feel like I'm constantly at other people's mercy is my particular pain point right now. And again, I
Mhm.
am speaking as an employer of many, many people. But to me, my phone is starting to feel like death by a thousand paper cuts. The dings, the distractions, the people reaching out, the this, the that. I don't like my phone very much right now. I will be honest. I remember when they first came out, I was obsessed. I loved it, loved the portability. But increasingly, I'm noticing my own addictive relationship to it. And I'm also commensurately noticing how detrimental it is for my clients' mental
Mhm.
health. Now, I'm not on social media very much, like at all, because I don't like it and I don't experience too many positive benefits. So I'm speaking just the phone in general, not just social media. I will say that my feeling about social media is quite poor. I don't see very many benefits for very many of my clients that come from social media, apart from being in some of the communities that can support people around
Mhm.
particular niche interest areas. So I'm not sure if this is what you wanted to hear, but I don't have a terribly pro phone, pro social media stance right now.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are developing fatigue with our phones, and we're starting to not like our phones as much. This is something you said that I think was interesting to me is I think the social media effect is very much the same as the relational trauma in that one person's experience is going to be very different from someone else's. And so I think some people probably have a very healthy, energizing experience related to social media, and other people have the exact opposite. And so I think it's important to be mindful of what your reaction and relationship is with
Mhm.
it and to do
I
things about
agree.
it. I know I took Facebook off my phone a few years ago, and I've kind of gotten into the bad habit of checking it through my web browser again. So I need to probably log out so that it's not easy to do
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
Um, but I just noticed that I was on the nonstop scroll, nonstop scroll.
Totally.
And
Totally.
I've even said to my husband now, there are times where I will deliberately leave my phone like on the kitchen island and when I sit down in the living room or when I'm having coffee in the morning and he'll be like, "Oh, here, do you want your phone?" And I said, "If I leave my phone someplace, I don't want it. Don't bring it to me. Like I'm leaving it there because I am intentionally choosing. I don't want to look at that stupid thing right now."
Yeah, exactly. And I want to step back because again, I'm having a ton of phone fatigue right now at this stage of my life, but I do want to invite you and myself and anyone listening to think of the phone and to think of social media as relatively neutral, like a brick might be. A brick can be used to build schools or it can be used to be thrown through a window.
Yeah.
Our phones, like, believe me, I am very grateful for my phone in some ways when I am stuck on a highway and yet have to send a work document off, right? Or something like that. It's a wonderful, powerful little machine. So there's the way that I
How
use
we
it.
use it.
Exactly. That's really the key. So I would just invite anyone, if you're noticing well, you're losing sleep because you're staying on it too long, or you're noticing an increase in comparison and jealousy and anxiety, right? Let's just be curious about how we're using it and get ourselves back to a more neutral and or positive relationship, however that looks
Mhm.
for you. I'm still trying to figure out mine,
Yeah.
and it's complicated.
It is, and it's habitual. I find that if I'm sitting in like, if I'm watching TV in the evening with my husband and I leave my phone on the kitchen counter, I don't actually feel the urge to get up and go look at it. But if
Hmm.
I'm watching TV with my husband and my phone's sitting on the table next to me, I just will habitually grab it and check it. Like,
Totally.
it's just it's a
Totally.
habit that needs to be changed, and the way that I change the habit is by moving the device. It's like, if I don't wanna eat ice cream, don't have ice cream in the freezer, right? Like
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's a really wonderful exercise to notice what's going on for me in this moment that just made me open the Facebook browser. For myself, when I've tried to really track it, every time I'm anxious and don't want to,
mm,
answer an email, I'll pop that thing open. Now, my relationship to Facebook is complicated. I've been on it since spring 2004 when I was at Harvard and I was
oh,
at
no.
Yale, Zuckerberg was at Harvard, and it was originally an Ivy networking tool.
Yes.
I think I was one of the first 1,000 people on it. So I've been on it like, oh, a large portion of my life. And so the neural pathway, the habit I have around checking it, deeply ingrained. So I'm really trying to work hard to step away from that and not just use it when I'm feeling anxious, right? Because I
Yeah.
notice that's my default. Check it when I'm anxious. Feel
Yeah.
better.
Yeah. That's a
Oh,
really,
honey.
really great point.
Mm.
All right. Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so
Oh,
much for
you're
your time.
welcome. Thank you for
Yeah.
having me and letting me talk about some of the things that I know aren't necessarily, the sexy parts that we talk about as entrepreneurs, right? But that are so foundational to how we build our businesses and move through the world of entrepreneurship. Mental health is a part of
Mhm.
the foundation. So thank you for
Yeah.
letting me talk about it more.
For sure. I think lots of business owners struggle with their mental health, and anything that you can do to help. Like if you think about the impact that entrepreneurs have in the world, they
Mhm.
have such a positive impact. They employ people, they provide them with their livelihood, they create positive experiences for their customers. And if they learn how to take better care of their mental health, then it only helps them to do a better job of leading their business, serving their customers, and supporting their teams. So I think it's an important conversation. I could probably talk to you all day.
Well, I'd welcome a second conversation. And thank you for that reframe around the impact we can have. And again, when we tend to ourselves, when we don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg, the ripple effects of change that we can have are that much more vast. So again, thank you for making that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. And for those of you listening, if you go to the show notes, you'll find all the ways that you can connect with Annie if you want to learn more about what she does. And thank you, Annie. It was really great to have you here and to see you. And I really appreciate you sharing all of your wisdom with us.
Thank you, Lisa. It was an honor.